going to change once you get more gear and once you are further in along in progression and more gear and more things to work with. So in terms of gear, in terms of things like that, some of the biggest things that you need are lots and lots of spirit as a holy priest, and it's made much, much easier, and it makes the idea of hybrid holy, which is, you know, using your hot as a filler and using a lot more direct healing as your primary healing. That's just a really, really big part of it. So things like demonic phylactery make a big deal, and having spirit in your off pieces, having spirit trinkets is very, very huge. But as you get into shorter and shorter fights, this stuff changes, and you're using much less hots at all because there is no time for filler because the fights are going so much faster. And that's in part because of Valor upgrades, because people have more gear, people are done with progression. So Renew starts getting tossed more and more to the side, and you're using way more direct healing, and you're using way and way more spirit to just pump out as much as possible to put up the big numbers. So I'm going to start right now looking at just progression, what you're doing for like your progression healing, how you can improve that. So I want to take a look at some heroic Archimon kills. So this is one of an earlier kills from mine and Acorn Smasher. So we had similar-ish kill times, about 6:51, and mine was 7:14, just a couple seconds difference. Both of us 4-healed, as you can see. Now I want to take a little bit of a difference, some like the first looks of like what you're doing and how you're able to be changing some things. So one of the biggest things you want to be looking at is obviously what buttons are you using on cooldown. So circle healing, of course, should be very, very high up. Prayer of Mending should be high up. Not as high up as it used to be because we're no longer using Tier 17's 2 set. Generally, it would be just under circle healing when you're still using it. So if you see really old logs, you'll see Prayer of Mending very, very high up, but now it's a little bit lesser now that we're using higher upgraded off-tier pieces. So with using your 90 talents, how much you're using your 90 talents, using them on cooldown, a fight like Archimon can kind of vary because if people are not stacked up enough, Surge and Divine Star is not going to be as good, so you might end up with Halo Surge, or if you don't have Demonic Phylactery or a very large amount of spirit, you're going to go with Halo Mindbender or something like that. You're never going to use Divine Star by itself. It's always going to be as a activator for Surge of Light. So you want to be able to maximize your proc generation if you are spec'd into it. So Binding Heal and Prayer of Healing are something that I kind of see in a lot of logs, and I even see in, let me see, other logs where you'll see how much people might be overusing it or not even using it like at all. So sometimes you'll see, this is an example from like Iskar for instance, where you know this player is using Binding Heal a ton. And the thing about Binding Heal is that while it does out heal Flash Heal and cost less, this is Glyphed Binding Heal, the one that heals 3 targets, it actually out heals Flash Heal and hits more targets, has a better spread of your healing. So even if something like your Echo is going to be spread out between like 3 targets, so it has a little bit less chance of overhealing. But the problem with it is that oftentimes, like, you're always going to be healing yourself with Binding Heal. And if you're healing yourself with Binding Heal, you top yourself off, well, now Binding Heal's not doing anything for you. So the overheal percentage that you're going to have, so he had 50% overheal here. He had 73% of it on just himself. So, and then you'll see even when he has like 50%, 50%. So when you have a very, very high overheal on Binding Heal, it's not doing enough for you. And instead, you should be looking more of using Prayer of Healing as your primary AoE healer rather than having Binding Heal, where Binding Heal is your support heal. And a lot of times on progression, it's super, super good to be using a lot of Binding Heal because you're going to have more light spread damage between multiple targets rather than very heavy damage on a couple targets, or very heavy damage on everybody, where you just need to be topping everybody off. On progression, it kind of varies, so that's one thing that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later when you have that shift. So, but when you're looking at a progression logs, again, you're looking at, are you using Circle Heal enough? Are you maintaining Renew uptime? Renew on just about every progression fight, you should be constantly blanketing Renews across the raid. You're going to be generating more Words of Mending. You're going to be just having hots on targets. And it's super, super good as well for just proccing Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate is going to be your primary 75 talent for all of progression. It's always going to be there when you need it, and the more spread of healing that you have on the raid, the better chance you are going to have of just proccing it the second somebody drops low. So always kind of blanketing the raid, always making sure that you're on top of that is going to be imperative. and it's going to show later on when you start looking through your buff section how much uptime are you going to be able to get out of it. This just showing like the uptime, how much Twisted Fate that you actually have, is also going to be extremely hampered in part if you're overhealing content. If you're overhealing content, that's one of the biggest things that hurts Holy Priests when you're just not able to get good Twisted Fate uptime. You know, it's something where you have a 15% increase to damage and healing. I mean, the damage is kind of whatever because we're not DPSers, but the healing increase, where some fights I've had 70-80% uptime, and sometimes I have like 10. And it depends on the healers. So when you're able to have the minimum amount of healers needed for progression, you can get a very high uptime, you can perform very highly, but a lot of guilds like overhealing, so that's really going to impact us, not only because of the fact that maybe absorbs or something like that are going to be healing the damage before we can heal it, but also because our primary 75 talent isn't doing anything for us. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other options in the trees are Power Infusion and Divine Insight. I don't really like either of those. Power Infusion is the closest one, but when you're getting really good Twisted Fate uptime on progression encounters, you're always going to have the bigger numbers. Just always going to happen. If not, if you're not getting good Twisted Fate uptime, like you could switch to Power Infusion, but it won't make much of a difference in your throughput because you're still overhealing content anyway. So it's better. The situations that Power Infusion will be better are situations that you're not really going to get much more of an increase than you're already getting. So, especially, and you're definitely not going to have any kind of ranks or anything. So, when you're taking Surge and Divine Star, I believe he's taking Halo. Oh, no, he's taking Divine Star. So if you're going to be running Surge and Divine Star, which is going to be for about 9 of the 13 bosses in the instance, you always want to take a look at how much you're generating. So in this fight, it was 6 minutes long, and he had 37 Surge procs. So about 5 minutes, give or take. The big thing when you're looking at Surge procs is it's free healing, and it's very large healing. You know, you're able to get, 70, 80k out of it. Maybe if your multi-strike is very high, it's going to skyrocket a little bit higher. So I know with my like 60-ish%, I'm usually averaging 70, 80k out of my flashes. Maybe more if I'm using it with my crit trinket on use or something like that. So these are very potent heals, and they're free. So when you're able to maximize it, and especially if you're using Divine Star anyway, you should be looking at your Surge of Light procs. And you should be looking at how you're aiming your Divine Star, how you're able to maximize the procs out of it. And you should always be tracking that and always looking at different fights and saying, am I getting enough procs? Am I generating as much as I should be? And not only is this going to help for just improving your overall throughput, but even when you're overhealing content. Because then you'll be able to have these procs that you're able to hold on, wait for the damage to come out, get the little snipe heal in there from time to time. So, otherwise, when you're looking at the other buffs, one thing that you might be looking at is going to be at the bottom if you're in a Chakra. It will not show if you are sitting in one Chakra the entire fight. If you're dancing around, it'll show at the very bottom when you're switching around. Generally, you're going to be in Sanctuary Chakra for the majority of the time, and that thing won't change. One thing to address, though, is how the Chakras are working, how good they are for you. So why you're in Sanctuary Chakra is primarily for the secondary effect. So Chakras have two effects. You have your Holy Word, and you have your secondary effect that's built into it. The secondary effect of Sanctuary is just cooldown reduction out of circle healing, which is great. It's really good. It's our most potent heal. It's an amazing heal. It's instant. It's way better than circle heal. It costs less than circle heal even when glyphed. Actually, when it's glyphed, it costs the exact same and hits an extra target and heals those targets for more, which is pretty good, I think. So maximizing the use of that is imperative. It's absolutely imperative. Whereas the Holy Word has its situations. Usually when I'm looking at somebody using Holy Word Sanctuary, it has to be when everybody or a large amount of people are going to be sitting in that zone, in that radius, for the duration of the spell and are taking damage. So just because they're stacked in there, on a fight like Iskar, it's kind of, I would say it's pretty bad because of the fact that there's just be a burst of damage. There's going to be one big burst of damage, everybody tops off, and then there's nothing to heal. And then it just overheals. So when you have like a 60% overheal on this, don't really think it's worth. I'm usually looking for at least 100k out of the cast. So he had 3 casts and he did 250k. It's okay. I don't think it's super good. It's not super bad either. It's one of the things that if you know they're all going to stack up and you know they're constantly going to be taking damage, it can be pretty good, but not always. So if you're looking at fights like Council, if you're looking at fights like Gorefiend, if you're looking at fights like Tyrant, where it's either constant damage or your health pool is always low, like Tyrant, you know, then it can be very good. But otherwise, I generally just let that thing sit there on my bars and never use it. Okay, so back to Binding Heal. I wanted to talk really quick about the balance between Binding Heal and Prayer of Healing and how it works in terms of AoE healing. So you want to have this balance, and the balance is kind of abstract, where you want to be using Binding Heal, much like Acorn's using on these logs, as a facilitator. It is facilitating more Prayer of Healing. You're using it not as a primary heal, like Penitence is using, where he just spam, and your third target is usually somebody taking damage and usually going to have effective healing, and it can do a lot of healing, but rather it's supposed to be used generally just to let you Prayer of Healing more. If you need quick serendipity, you don't have surge charges, and you don't want to waste a lot of mana using flash on a target that could overheal, well, Binding Heal is a very good way of facilitating that. And usually, it has very, very low overheal. So Acorn's has 24% overheal, and most of its targets have no overheal whatsoever, and the primary overhealer is just on himself. So one way to keep in mind is, like, when he's casting these on himself, you can even look through here and just do a quick highlight of this and look at the healing that he receives. So if he's already has like Renew on himself, if he's putting Palm on himself, or if he's bouncing it off himself, sometimes those things will affect it, but you don't want to be healing yourself when you're planning to use a lot of binding, because then it's not effective healing, and it's just going to overheal. So, and you can of course just go through the logs and you can just highlight different sections of when he's using Binding Heal and the actual effect of like what else is happening to him. So if he has Renew constantly ticking on himself, or if he just flashed himself and now he's going to use, Binding Heal again, so that's causing the overheal. That's one really big thing to kind of look at, because that can make it so that you're wasting like a surge proc on yourself when you could have used it on somebody else and then just let Binding Heal heal you. Something to keep in mind. Now, one of the biggest things I see is whenever you're comparing your healing to other players, and it's probably one of the better correlations when you're not massively overhealing content. So this fight was pretty well overhealed. This Iskar counter was pretty well overhealed, but whereas Archimon, not so much. If you look at the cast section is at the very, very side, very, very end, and this is going to show your average cast per minute. So like in StarCraft, you'll have like actions per minute, things like that. This is the amount of cast that you're having over the course of the fight. So they have an active and they have an effective. The effective is the one that you want to look at, so the right. So you had 39.2, whereas Acorn had a 42. So if you're comparing it to all the other healers on this encounter, actually, yeah, Acorn had the highest actions per minute. He's casting the most stuff, and with Holy Priests, we're reducing our circle heal cooldown just by casting things. We're reducing, enhancing the amount of Prayer of Mendings that we're putting out on the raid with Words of Mending, and you're just having HOTS everywhere. You should always be casting. Always, always, always. So when that happens, when you have significantly more healing done than or more cast done than other players, you're just going to heal more, And even when you're overhealing, the type of overhealing that is a detriment to you is the type that ooms you. So it's okay if you're casting lots of Renews and it's overhealing, because that's a very cheap spell. It's your filler spell. But it's very, very harmful to you if you're casting Flash Heal on like the tiniest damage that you see, because you're just going to yourself. So if you're ever looking at your logs and you're saying, oh, it's overheal a lot, it must be casting wrong things, and you're casting just like lots of Renew, well, that's what you should be doing, and maybe you just have way too many healers. So you can even be looking at this if you go to your resource section, and then under hit points, you do the drop-down menu, and then you go to mana. I'm going to do the same thing here. And of course, these are two different fights, so keep that in mind. But how much mana are you spending over the course of the fight? And this graph at the bottom, or sorry, the table under the graph, is going to show, are you using health pots, or sorry, are you using mana pots? Are you using your racial ability to get more mana? Do you have the mana leech from Shadow Fiend, or Mindbender rather? So all these things will show up in terms of mana gains and how much gains you're making out of that. So if you're running in this fight, for instance, he could have used a mana pot, he could have used a channeled pot, just to kind of gain some more. And that goes also to your gearing. If you're looking at your mana through, if you're looking at your mana with respect to like what gear you want to switch around, if you have two items, say, you have a neck piece that has multi-strike and haste, and then you have a neck that has multi-strike and spirit. Well, if you're not using your mana throughout the course of all these encounters, you're finishing the fights with, 10 to 20% mana, and these two items are the same exact item level. Well, spirit has a value of 0 if you're not spending all your mana, because you get nothing out of it. So that's when you drop more spirit. If you're finishing fights and you're just and you've already mana potted, or you channeled mana pot and you just still are going maybe you want to get more spirit. Maybe you want to look at what spells you're casting, which is another thing that you're able to do here, which is highlighting your cast section. So how much flash heal are you casting? And you have to see this by relating how much are you hard casting, where flash heal will show not only surge proc casts, but also casts that you're just spending the mana on. So you have to go into your buff section and you have to compare how many surge procs you have. So right here he has 32. And how many he has 37. And then you have to more or less subtract that from what he's casting here. So all of his flashes were just from surge procs, and all of Acorn's were just from surge procs. So as you're progressing, you're going to see more and more of that. It's very rare that you're going to be hard casting on progression, but as you get into more of advanced healing, or when fights are going like a minute long, that's when you're going to be casting way more direct healing, way more expensive healing, because fights are lasting 1 or 2 minutes, and that's when you just need to bomb heals and be as greedy as possible with your mana. And you need to spend as much of it as possible when you're able to, and then you need to be as efficient with your serendipity as possible, because you don't want to waste too much of your mana. So the biggest example of that is like if you're 1 or 2 healing Iron Reaver, that's about a minute and a half fight, give or take. So how much are you able to spend when you have no regen? You just have your spirit, and you have your mana pot. That's all you have, and then you need to bomb heals for the minute and a half. Generally, like, I'm running with a Mythic Phylactery, and I'm running with about 1900 spirit on my armory. And even on like a 2-minute fight, something like that, if there's really a ton of damage going out, you can burn through all of that spirit. You can burn through all that mana. You can burn through the discount from Demonic Phylactery, and you have to be very, very careful with how much you're spending. And most of the time, your dumps are gonna be from Flash Heal and Prayer of Healing. Binding Heal, like I said, is going to get a little bit pushed aside when you're getting into progression, or when you're getting into rank healing. I'm sorry. When you're getting into ranked healing, it's going to get a little bit pushed to the side because it's not as big a burst healing. But on progression, it's super good. It's super good because there's just less damage and there's more downtime where you're able to prepare for stuff. So, and again, just looking through how many casts of just your big 3. So your Renew, your Prayer of Mending, your Circle Healing. These are the big things that I'd say would be the primary focus if you're just learning. Getting those on cooldown, using them as much as possible, and remaining good uptime with your Renews. From there, then you want to look at how effective you are with Surge and Divine Star, what your Surge proc generation is like, how much you're actually using it, when are you making use of Holy Word Sanctuary, how useful is that, how much are you able to use Prayer of Healing based on your own spirit levels, your Demonic Phylactery level, things like that. That's when you want to look at those, and then you get to be more and more aggressive. And then you get to push numbers from there. So for advanced logs, I wanted to take a look at a bunch of parses. If I can pull it up in a second here. I wanted to look at a bunch of parses that were going around like recently. So I wanted to take a look first off at Fellord. Fellord's probably one of the better fights out there, where there's just very, very constant damage. There's very, very constant healing that is needed on the raid, and how you're able to top people off quickly, how you're able to maximize your spirit levels, how you're able to just work on it to just burst as much healing as possible. And that'll include piling as much healing as possible into the ring so that you get the biggest ring explosion, because once you start going for individual healing or just 2 healing stuff, your ring becomes extraordinarily better. It becomes way, way better. So this is a 2-minute fight versus a 1.5, give or take. As you can see, the Etherealist, your healer ring, becomes extraordinarily important. It's super, super important. And if you'll notice, Binding Heal, it becomes so much less used. So much less used. And the big reason for it is more because you need burst healing on single targets and multiple single targets rather than you need some healing on multiple targets. Some little bit of AoE healing. So what happens is you're going for more aggressive healing with Flash Heal to push health pools up faster. That way you can use your AoE healing just from Prayer of Healing. That way it's a little bit more expensive, but it also just pushes people's health pools up enough, long enough so that you don't have to heal them for a little bit, and then you can heal other people, and then you can go back to them. Whereas if you're just using lots and lots of Binding Heal, you need to sustain their health pools at a very high level, and if they take burst damage, well, they could be at 60%, and you're only Binding Healing them, so they're being healed for like 20-ish K, rather than healing them for like 80K, 90K with a single Flash Heal. So pushing health pools up as fast as possible, as aggressively as possible, is super imperative. And if you can look through the graphs on these fights, we're skyrocketing up to 800K, 700K just from our D-Hims, and then the after effect of it is our rings. And when you have these huge bursts of damage, it's super, super important just to keep people alive at all costs. So having a lot of spirit, having a lot of mana, again we're going to look at our mana pools here, and then just this downward trend. You know, you're going as aggressively as possible, you're trying to sustain your mana as much as possible, and then just skyrockets to the bottom. Actually, neither of us ended up using our mana pots here. I think he went to Angel form as well, if I'm not mistaken, which can be extremely effective. He did, yeah. So if you're ever in a fight where it's very, very easy to off yourself, think Blackhand when you go down into the last phase. It's very, very easy just to walk in front of one of his shuriken knife things and just blow up. You just die, right? It's super, super easy in that situation, and if you know the fight's not going to last more than 30 seconds, it's extremely good to burn through as much mana as possible, then you can just go into Angel form. Because by the time your Angel form fades, well, the fight's over, so it doesn't matter. The problem is, if you're ever going to do it and you're going to try to allocate a battle res, and I just cannot stress enough how bad of an idea it is. If it's needless and there's no need to do it and you just want to do it just to maximize your mana, it can be a really bad idea. Really bad idea, especially when you get into more and more encounters where you need every little battle res you can get. But if you know the fight's about to end and you can be an Angel for the entirety of the rest of the end of the fight, then it's okay. Then it's fine because you're going to be actively healing anyway. And you're not going to harm the raid at all by doing it. So there's a bit of a difference there, and that's one thing I wanted to highlight of how to game Angel form and how you want to make the use of it. On this log, he actually glyphed his Angel form, so he has a 30% boost out of his Angel form, so he goes to the very end of the fight, he jumps into a bunch of waves, and then he explodes, and then you're able to get the bonus healing at the end. It can be very strong, but when you're planning to do it, it can be very risky. So if you're just starting, or you're just starting to like 1 or 2 heal fights, I would really, really be careful with how much you're trying to game it and how much time is left on it. So I have a weak aura that has like a time to die that like calculates how fast the boss is going to die relative to that. So if I know I'm pretty low health and I can jump into fire and off myself and then go Angel form, I can do it, but you have to be really, really, really careful with it. If you're not sure about how to do it properly, I would not advise it. So in terms of your healing breakdown, if you'll notice, it's extraordinarily different from when you're healing like progression, or you're healing with the average amount of healers on a progression encounter. Renew gets way, way lower and becomes far less of a priority. The big important thing about this is how much Renew can provide your burst healing. When encounters are only lasting 2 minutes, a minute and a half, you need to top off health pools now. Renew can be extremely good, but it won't push up health pools immediately, and that's sometimes what you need to do. Is I think like a single Renew will be healing somebody for about 100k with no overheal, but you don't have time to wait for that. So instead, it's extremely important just to be spamming as much as possible with as much direct healing as possible just to push health pools up. So you'll see that with very, very heavy use of Flash Heal by both of us, Always going to be having heavy use of Circle Heal, of course. He is a little bit lower end, and I think that partially is because he went into... He didn't go into Serenity. I've seen a couple logs of where they will go into Serenity on this specific encounter, and what they'll do is they'll go into Serenity just so they can make use of the Holy Word, and then they can start topping off Befouls really quick. It's one strategy. It depends on the strength of your raid, or if you don't have things like a Nature's Vigil, Ancestral Guidance, or Vamp, or something like that, that can kind of be a support heal while Befoul's going out. Because that's pretty much the most difficult part of, like, Zakuun, for instance, is topping off Befouls by yourself. So, how you go about doing that is going to vary pretty drastically. It might have been just that he went into Angel form and wasn't able to Circle Heal as much, or something like that. Or he was worried about casting something else, or he was casting more Prayer of Healing when he should be casting Circle Heal. Kind of varies. It'll depend on just the damage going out and how much you're going to be able to spam, right? So, again, it's going to be extraordinarily important, and this is something you're going to see more and more with like highly parsing logs, is how much you're making use out of Surge. So I had 14 compared to 15. And I think I had a 20-second shorter fight, so it's pretty efficient use out of both of us. Pretty efficient use out of Twist of Fate on both accounts. And it'll vary, of course, by the damage that your raid's taking and how efficient they're able to be, and also how many healers. So, like, we were 2 healing my fight, and I was healing with the Disc Priest, so my Twist of Fate could be a little bit lower because of that. And it'll kind of vary. And you even see with things like Lightwell, you just put Lightwell down. You know, Lightwell's down for the entirety of the fight, but his does, you know, 700,000 more than mine does. So, how people drop low, how much damage your raid takes is something you always have to look at, and the avoidable damage that they're taking. So, and one of the biggest things you can look at is when you're doing these things is going into the problem section. So, if there are slow deaths, so there were a lot of slow deaths on their kill. So it could have been just lack of sufficient healing, which it looked like, or people taking damage from, it would just be the Befouled. So like the Befouled killed a couple people, as they're still constantly taking damage from other things going out, like the Fel Crystals being out on the raid or something like that. So, but then you can go and look at how many health tonics they're using. The damage taken by the raid is going to be extremely important in determining, like, if you're trying to compare 2 logs of what everybody else is doing, right? So, if you're comparing damage, if you're comparing damage taken between these 2 logs, you know, there was significantly less damage taken in just a 20-second period. So it could have been something like, oh, well, there's no seeds that we didn't get, and they got an extra wave of seeds, so that was a problem for them. And or they had more people dead, so it's even more of a problem for them to be able to finish off the boss. So things like that are also going to be kind of similar. So if you're trying to compare logs to maybe a friend of yours and they're taking significantly more damage, or you look at a fight like Manaroth where everybody jumps right into the water at the beginning of the fight and you just divine him, you know, that's something you always got to look at. You always got to look at when you're comparing just the healing that both people are doing and in what context of each fight. So, speaking of that, I wanted to look at a couple different logs. Let's see. This one is probably one of the biggest jokes, I would say, is Iron Reaver. Iron Reaver, when you're one healing it and you have a lot of mages. A lot of mages. So both these encounters are about, they're both under a minute. And these are the 2nd and 3rd place logs, I think, for Iron Reaver. We have Menemin on the right and Fun Sponge on the left. So they're both taking Halo Surge. And they're both using Twist of Fate. And the majority of their healing is Divine Hymn and the Ring. When they're killing something this quickly, they Divine Hymn. And then the fight's over. You're able to look at like all the healing that's going on, and this is their HPS, right? You know, just a little bit of renew, there's some other spells being cast, stuff like that. Divine Hymn, fight's over. That's it. You know? In these situations, you have to look at how much damage the raid is taking, if they're standing in any kind of unnecessary things and stuff like that, but then also just the fight ends. And then that's it. So a lot of this is going to be how well are you setting up for your Divine Hymn. So this is the entire duration of your Divine Hymn, right? Entire duration in the yellow. What other kind of spells are being cast during it is extraordinarily important because you have to look at the healing buff that's going out with Divine Hymn. So ideally, you want to have just a whole blanket of other healing spells out as you're hymning. So when you have lots of renews out on the raid, when you have just put Circle Heal on cooldown and just put Prayer of Mending on cooldown, just put Halo on cooldown, then you Divine Hymn, and then there's all that spread of healing going on. You know, so much healing. Actually, you would Halo afterwards to benefit from it. Strike that. You would Halo after Divine Hymn because there's still that 7-second, 8-second window of the 10% buff, so you don't want to do that afterwards. So how well you're setting up for that can be huge, and if you're looking at it, little things like Prayer of Mending, they're just bouncing all over the place as you're hymning, can be super good. It's maintaining your buff, and having a 500k difference could be the difference of just, oh, well, he casted Prayer of Mending 2 more times before the hymn went out and there were still charges available. Or his cast per minute was just a little bit higher throughout the course of the fight, so he's getting a little bit more Prayer of Mendings. And again, just looking at cast per minute, they're both probably going to be relatively high. The perfect number that you want to be looking at is you want to be looking for low 50s. You want to see like 52, like Fun Sponge has, 55, like Miniman has. 55 is about the highest that you're really getting. You really need to be on top of it. And obviously, a little bit of input lag, but might change things. But 52, 55 is generally the highest that you're going to be going, and that's really going to be the goal. Is when you're looking at your cast per minute, that's going to be the goal for you. Is you want to be getting as high of a cast per minute as possible, casting the most stuff to do the most healy stuffs, and get rewarded for it. So it's a little thing, but whenever you're comparing logs and you're saying, well, I'm doing the exact same breakdown as he is, well, he's just casting more things than you are, and then that's the difference, right? So even when there's things like Circle Heal, for instance, will look so low on these meters because the fight just ends. You know, they don't really have time to cast much Circle Heal because they Circle Heal, they hymn, Circle Heal comes off cooldown after the hymn, they Circle Heal again, and then it's just over, right? So some of the more, this is just about the burstiest fight that you can really get, and generally it will come down to just who takes a little bit more damage and who's able to put out a little bit more healing or have a big enough absorb from the ring. So again, looking at damage taken for the raids, you know, another 2 million was taken by Sponge's raid, and then you result in, you know, he actually ended up doing more healing because he had a better, his ring ended up being more efficient. Like his ring is actually causing much more of an absorb at the end of the effect. So you even see it a little bit delayed further out. So it may just be more damages going out on them. It may just be that he stacked all his cooldowns together, which you can also check here because both of them are running Intuition's Gift. So when you see Intuition's Gift, Etherealist, Divine Hymn, so he's stacking all of these things together. Etherealist, Sudden Intuition, Divine Hymn. Just a second. Or there it is. Yeah. These things were popped just a little bit early, so it might have been he had maybe a little bit less of an effect, or people were a little bit more topped off, something like that. It's always something you need to be keeping in mind of when you're lining them up and also how much damage everybody else is taking. So I think a little bit better of a log to look at is if you're looking at a 2 heal of it. Because the 2 heals, this is not the one I want. The 2 heals of it, there's actually things happening. So I want to take a look at, I know I have my notes there. Get out of here, notes. I wanted to take a look at the 2 heal of this with myself and Looking for Boyfriend. So he healed it with the Shaman, I healed it with the Rested Druid. Our fights were 216 to 135. So there was actually a more significant break off there, but their HPS was actually pretty well close together. One of the bigger things is the shorter the fights you're going to have, generally the higher that your HPS is going to be, just because of things like Divine Hymn having such a big impact. So one of the first things I noticed when I walked into this was Circle Heal being my top heal, and then Circle Heal being a much lower heal, even though we used it the same amount, and the fight disparity, like the extra 30-40 seconds or something like that, the difference of the fight. And that's where you have to look at the chakras. He wasn't in a chakra to start the fight, and that really hurt him. And if you guys have ever seen my stream and you see this big weak aura right in front of me, if I ever change a talent or something like that, it's always to remember to be in a chakra, so that I don't have that problem. And that's something that really, really ended up hurting him in the end, because early on in the fight, his cast of Circle Heal were much, much lower. He actually did something pretty interesting in this fight, and that's one thing I wanted to highlight, was the powered shield usage. When you're in an encounter where you might have to move a little bit, but it's also a very short fight, so you want to be able to just always be casting healing spells. Just every single time. You're always casting something. So he ended up taking Body and Soul so that he could get out of fire really quick, get out of the barrage really quick, while also, healing himself. Because if you're casting feathers, it does no healing. So it's a little thing to keep in mind. Of course, on progression, I would never really recommend it because feathers can just provide such a reliable on-demand burst, and you're always going to be healing with a Disc Priest. So it's something to kind of keep in mind as you're going through these. And especially if you're wanting to push for 1 or 2 heal fights and stuff like that, of maximizing every single global so that you're always healing. So one thing you'll notice is the binding heal use versus my no binding heal use. Right here, Elf Boyfriend he's that balance that I'm talking about. There's always going to be that balance between prayer of healing, which is going to be significantly higher, and then you're also going to have a lot of binding heal, because you want to have it so that when there's very, very heavy constant damage going out, you want to use binding 2 times, then prayer of healing. Binding 2 times, prayer of healing. And then you're keeping Ko on cooldown, you're keeping Palm on cooldown, you're keeping your 90 talent on cooldown, and using the procs from those things. But when you're hard casting spells, it's just binding, lots of binding and prayer of healing. So he was constantly doing that, and that's the balance that you should be having, where he's always using his serendipity and having that kind of balance. Whereas on mine, I actually go for a bit of the opposite, where I'm not using binding heal at all, and instead I'm just using flash. Just constantly flash, constantly using flash heal, pushing people's health pools up as fast as possible. And I think that's one difference that could be attuned to playstyle, or it could also be attuned to healing comp. So if I'm healing with the Rested Druid, for instance, there'd be a lot more HOTS. So I will direct way less of my healing towards HOTS. He's healing with Elf Boyfriend's healing with a Shaman, so he's going to be having a little bit more direct healing, so he will have a little bit more HOTS because they might be more effective. So it'll depend on that in a lot of ways, because when you have just that constant steady stream of healing, it can be super, super good, especially when people want to ride the waves and they want to ride the blitzes and they get carried off, which is a problem. And it's a good way of balancing out your role when you're under healing, your role when you're with different healers, and how your actions with other healers will affect you. So it's one really, really big thing to keep in mind. Of course, you're going to have amazing divine hymns once you're under healing stuff, and using it with the ring is amazing, of course. Actually, I don't think I had mine with the ring. I think the druid took it. I am pretty sure the druid took it. Etherealist. He did take it. That monster. Yep. So here would be my divine hymn into the end of the fight. But when you're able to, even when I did not use it together, it's still a huge, huge ring absorb compared to, say, your 4 or 5 healing fights. If you're looking at what the healer ring was really made for, it's pretty much been made for solo healing content or under healing content, because that's when the absorb is really going to have a big effect. Much more pronounced of an effect than when you're healing progression stuff. So again, it's going to be very, very high direct healing, very, very high just spamming of your most expensive spells, of your highest throughput spells, and even if we're going to mana, I always am stressing this, when you're looking at your mana and how much you're able to spend, be super, super important. So if I'm into this fight, and I'm going to go into this fight next week, and I'm going to look at these logs, I'm going to say, okay, I need to double mana, or I need a double in pot here, because I'm not spending all my mana, or I need to switch around my neck, or I need to switch around my ring, or something like that, because I'm not spending all my mana. That's when it's really, really important to look at. And then you can, of course, look at Twisted Fate uptime and how that will have a really, really big effect, as well as just like who's riding the waves. So if you know like melee is going to be riding waves, making sure you have a circle heal on them, making sure you have renews on them because they're going to run out of range, so you're healing them, but also because they're going to drop really low and you're going to be able to get Twisted Fate uptime out of them. So knowing that guy in the raid, probably the hunter, who takes a lot of damage, so always having something on him. The spread of healing that you have on the raid will be really, really big towards just maximizing uptime and things like that. Be very, very important. One thing to keep in mind, if you ever think that you're not casting things enough and you're looking at okay, I want to maximize my cast per minute. Going into your replay and just watching what you're casting. And if you ever have to move for blitz or something like that, so it's going to happen here where I'm going to be targeted by blitz and I'm going to have to start moving. And then you're going to see, once I start moving, that I'm going to constantly be switching targets and I'm constantly going to be renewing other targets. So I feather, and I'm targeting other people, and I'm targeting other people, and I'm targeting other people. So we'll go back. My character's right here. He's the highlighted white dot. Actually, I can remove everybody. Let's remove everybody. Nobody else in this raid. Just be me. Okay. Right. So I'm just going to see me moving, and then every single time right here in this section, I'm going to be changing targets. Just always going to be changing targets, always going to be casting something. So I cast my feather, start moving, I cast renew, cast renew, cast renew. And then I cast circle heal. Just every single global. And if you ever get into those situations, it can help if you're streaming it for yourself, you're recording it for yourself, or you just watch the replay on the log, on WarcraftLogs. Those are the biggest instances, at least when you're seeing people with pretty low throughput who are progressing. They're going to be worrying so much on the mechanics that they won't have this filler. They're just not doing anything else. So you always got to watch out for that, and also how you are reacting to mechanics happening. So if you ever have to run out for like Fell Surge on Zolarak, you always need to be renewing people. You need to be renewing the other people that have damage on them. You know, always constantly casting. You know, always be casting. Always, always, always. And the last log I wanted to take a look at was actually a little bit more of the interesting ones. It was Tyrant. And this kind of goes into two branches. It goes off into why Mastery is not as good anymore, and it goes off into playstyle for this fight. So I've seen a variety of ways that people have done this encounter. Tyrant, of course, there's no overhealing once you enter phase 2, and once it kind of locks people down into the lower health pool. And there's been a lot of inventive ways to heal the fight. I tried out Clarity of Purpose a lot. Sadly, I don't think it's good enough to be just rank 1 constantly. I think it requires probably ended up like 2. You would probably have to end up like 2 healing it, and everybody would constantly be at like 10% health, afraid of dying, to actually get good use out of it. But sadly, I don't think that's really realistic, and it's really usable. And you also have the penalty of not having good Prayer Surprise, which is your 2-piece uptime. So you're probably going to be losing out on a lot of the haste uptime, because just casting Palm on cooldown alone doesn't always seem to be enough. So, and we're actually seeing it now, even with, if you want to look real quick, you'll even see now with people using Palm just about on cooldown, and their uptimes, there's still little breaks here and there. And you look at most logs, now that we're not using double 2-set anymore, you're actually going to not get full value out of your 2-set. Seeing it more and more with the logs. And, maybe you'll get like a 97% here, but there's to me that break where it falls off, and then he has to wait until he gets the extra 3 stacks, because it, of course, stacks up to 3 times. So there will be a break, and he'll have to reset all his stacks again, or something like that. But looking at this fight, the first thing I wanted to look at was the trinket usage. And I pulled up their armories, and I wanted to kind of highlight that. So Sharia has always been holy. He's been holy through all the progression. He's been playing it the entirety of the time. So all of his gear is multi-strike. It's all itemized. It's all in the best in slot that you can get. He has a ton of sockets with 6. And then his name's Enhanced Soul. I think it's supposed to be like Weakened Soul in Korean. I'm pretty sure. That's what Google Translate said. He's, of course, primarily disc. He's in his disc spec, as you can see when you pull up the armory. But he also has a ton of mastery. So he has a ton of mastery from his DSI, and a ton of mastery from his gems, as you can see, with just the color of the gems, because this is a multi-strike gem. This is a mastery gem. And I wanted to highlight how not great mastery is on this encounter. So if you're looking... and I wanted to highlight, this is his mastery. If you're not quite sure when you're looking at it, I'm going to select him as holy, select this holy, and it'll always be crit, haste, mastery, versatility. Crit, haste, mastery, versatility. Crit, haste, mastery, versatility. And you can kind of see in the way the words are represented, or even in the numbers when it says the 52%, and then it's 12% plus the 40%. Mastery is the only one that has that, where you have a baseline amount. So that's how you know it's mastery. So, of course, he has a much, much higher amount of mastery in his gear, and then you are able to see it in his healing breakdown. A couple people were joking about how like mastery would be super good in this fight, and I wanted to kind of address that and highlight why it's really not. So the fights are 459, 419. So Weakened Soul guy has a much shorter fight by a minute, and his Echo does a lot. It does 7.83 million, whereas Asharia's with 30% less mastery does less than a million, or does a million less healing. And just a minute difference. And this is a minute longer. So it isn't a gigantic difference in terms of healing. Or sorry, it's not a big difference in terms of like what you're actually gaining out of Echo. Echo like will have this really big number on the meters. It'll look really cool and stuff like that when you're Disc Priest switching into Holy Gear. But in actuality, it's not that big of an impact. You'll see Echo have a very big impact on this encounter specifically, just because there is no overhealing, but at the same time, it isn't something that is that gigantic. That is something that's really desirable. Whereas Haste and Multi-Strike have a much bigger effect because you're casting more things, or of course it's Multi-Strike, so it's your attuned stats. You're gaining so much out of it. So it's something I kind of just wanted to address, kind of wanted to look at. The other highlights for this, of course, are just using Sanctuary. If you look, the breakdown of all the players that are being hit by it, they're all melee players primarily. So you'll have your Rogue, your Unholy DK, Ret Paladin, Warrior, Rogue, Warrior, and then he kind of switches, and then less of the healing is going to be on the range players. So this is be where maybe he moved his Sanctuary, his second Sanctuary cast was people who had Font, or it was on the entire raid as they're all stacked up moving around in the last phase. So one of the better ways to do it, of course, is just casting it on the melee right when you enter phase 2, because it's just a constant static group, and then of course you can cast it on everybody else as you're moving around and as you're going to be sitting in one spot. So for healing use, the biggest thing about this fight is like it's a trap. Once you enter phase 2, you're like, yes, I can spam as much as I want. Let's go. And then you end up ooming yourself very quickly. The biggest thing is like not to just panic like that, and you'll see that these guys don't do that, is they're still casting so much Renew, and you see it in the uptimes here. You see it in the uptimes, you see it in their healing breakdowns where they're still just Renew blanketing. And I even saw one log where this guy went in Serenity Chakra, and he just constantly blanketed the raid, and he maintained Renew uptime out of it. So it's one really cool thing that you're able to do, and I think he had like a top 5 Parse or something like that. So it's effective, but when you're losing out on that much circle heal uptime, it can be just okay. It's not that significant. So circle heal is such a big impact on your healing as a whole that it can be kind of harmful, just kind of okay. Nothing special at best. So one of the more popular things for Holy Priest to do in this encounter specifically is making use out of Glyph, Guardian Spirit, and being able to just pound healing into a single target because of the fact that they're taking 200% increased healing. So one of the things that you don't want to do though is you don't want to be casting it on a tank because of the tank debuff, because of the Mortal Strike, because then it'll kind of negate itself. You ideally want to cast it on somebody who will take more healing, or I believe it would be Rogue where they end up taking more healing from the Recuperate Glyph. So you would just pound healing into them, ideally. Holy isn't really known for its single target healing, of course, so primarily it's something that you're going to see with like Paladin Parses, where they wait for the Holy Priest to Guardian Spirit their target, and then they just blow him up, and they take care of him. So an interesting thing I saw in this fight was just Sign of the Dark Star, which is your DSI, which reaffirms that this is just about the same gear that he would use for Holy as he's using for Disc, as if he's keeping the same trinket. He may switch around a couple items, but primarily that'll be what he would be running with. His multi-strikes were a little bit higher, but because his Echo Light just still has such a high uptime, or such a high impact, it looks to me that he has primarily mastery gear. So, and it's not doing that much more than Isharia's when he has next to no mastery. So He did use Serenity, and he's using Serenity just to be able to top off people in phase 2, or he's using it just to be able to further pound like flash heals into them, to be able to get more of the crit effect, because of course there is no overhealing. But he has it at a price of losing out on some circle heals. And you'll notice, even though it's a minute difference, there's still significantly less circle heals, and that's something you kind of have to keep in mind. Is like when this extremely potent heal that, of course, is going to spread Echo, it's going to spread Echo Light onto more targets and stuff like that, and it's an extremely efficient heal. When you're not using that as much as possible in this fight, it can kind of bite you a little bit. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. Surge generation, again, 39 for a 4-minute fight, so he has almost 10 a minute. 10 a minute is kind of the highest I've seen, and the highest I've personally been able to go after, and that's really, really, really what you want to go for. You want to be getting it so that just about every single D-star throw, you're getting 2 charges, sometimes 3 charges if you're lucky, and the best way to be doing that, of course I have a video, link in the description, is just to always be throwing it through the melee. 99% of the fights you're going to be throwing it through the melee. The melee is always just a tight clump, there's always going to be people there, because it's melee. And from my experience, it's always been the easiest to throw it through. You just throw it right through the center of the boss, hits the tanks, hits the melee, you get charges, and then it flies back to you and you get more charges. So perfecting that and getting the most effect possible out of that is going to help your mana regen if you're running It's going to help your throughput. It's going to help when you're overhealing encounters. It's going to help everything. Super, super important. It's super, super important through Hellfire Citadel just to maximize your use of it. You can also look at how much mending they're getting. These are the prayer of mendings that are going out. And this is a kind of a side indicator of somebody's cast per minute, of how many spells that they're casting. So if they have a low mending, so Asheria has a pretty low mending for being a minute fast or a minute slower. If anything, he should have way more mendings because the fight's lasting much longer. So then you can go and check this out by going to the cast section and exiting out of here. And then you can go look at it. Here he has 52 casts per minute, and Asheria has 49. So these things can go just a little bit further into showing you actually how much people are casting, how many spells are getting out, and the other effects that you're getting from that. So if he's not casting as much, then you're losing out on Prom, you're losing out on Circle Heal, losing out on a lot. So isn't a lot of that mastery from DSI, which is an inescapable side effect? It is, yes. That's an inescapable side effect, and it's one of the things that is why I would not recommend using it on the fight. But it's also to highlight more of, not only does he have the trinket, which has more mastery, but more of his gear will have more mastery. And if he had Intuition's Gift instead of that trinket, instead of DSI, he would definitely be having higher throughput. You know, you'd be able to pair it up with his hymn in phase 2. He'd definitely be having higher healing out of that. Definitely be having higher healing when he's able to pair it with a ring and with Intuition's Gift and stuff like that. The mastery, while it looks really good in this fight, is just deceptive. And that's the biggest thing I wanted to highlight, is that even though it's a fight with no overheal, even though it will appear very, very high in the meters because there's no overheal, even though one of the biggest negatives to Echo of Light is the overheal, even when you're in a situation without overheal, or with very minimal overheal, it's still pretty garbage at best. So, yeah. But thank you guys for watching. If you have any kind of questions, definitely let me know in the YouTube stuffs, or in chat now for the live stream. Yeah, we'll see y'all next time. I think. Hopefully. And I think this scene changed. Yay! Oh my god, I feel like I talked to Mile. I don't have some number on my face. It's called Rosacea. I wanted to make that for YouTube, and I also wanted to make it for you guys, so